Welcome to the Good AP Times podcast, the accounts payable podcast presented by Factura AI, the only accounts payable software for your multi-location business. Excited for this next episode? Well, thank you all so much for joining. I am your host, Megan Hardy, and we're so thrilled to have today's guest with Andy Laufer, managing partner at Laufer LLP. Andy, you've been in the trenches of finance for a long time, but what really stands out is where you've spent your time. You've been deep in the world of franchise, multi-unit operators, especially obviously on the McDonald's owner-operator side and similar businesses. But what's cool is you're not doing just theoretical finance, the traditional finance. This is the finance inside businesses that are growing, adding locations, juggling vendors, dealing with tight margins, and where kind of small operational issues turn into big financial problems fast. And so, thrilled to be really talking about our topic today, which is really focusing on how finance teams are becoming operational partners. And before we got started, you said something that was so interesting, which is that the back office needs to not just be a tool, it needs to be a profit center. And so would love to kind of hear your thoughts on that and really where you're seeing the finance continually change, especially as these businesses grow.
Well, I appreciate that, Megan. Thank you very, very much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you and anyone that's going to take the time to listen, to this podcast. At the end of the day, I'm a CPA. I had the traditional training. And when I first started in my career, one of the key things you saw was we were just reporting about history. And I hated history when I was in high school because you can't change history, but history repeats itself as everybody eventually learns. And I was committed that we were not going to repeat history, that we were going to truly become a functional part of the business, not just this cost of, oh, I got to pay my CPA or I got to pay my bookkeeper or my finance, team. How do we add, value? So my focus has always been is how do we add value as a component of the finance team? So I always talk to my folks is we need to be more like a GPS. What's that roadmap? Tell me where you're trying, to get to. And the get to is, are we trying to serve more customers? Are we trying to create more profitability and cruise, gross margin? So what is the measurement tool? Well, the measurement tool becomes the data that is gathered in the back office. So how do we create a back office that creates efficiencies so that data can be processed extremely efficiently, as timely, as possible? One of the things that I always talk about with people is, well, I am a perfectionist just by nature.
Yeah.
If we just try to be perfect every time, we are gonna so miss the mark. I'd rather be early with 95%, accuracy and give a client, actionable information than give them a April P&L in June that tells them what happened then and tell them, but I'm 100% correct in terms of the data. So we're striving really to be a resource for the operations team and one where the operations team turns around and goes, I can't live without that back office. I can't live without those, financial teams. So what really drives me is to help the organization be more profitable and really achieve whatever their goals are that they set out.
I love that. It's also really funny that you said that because our first podcast had almost the exact same answer, which was I'd rather be 95% accurate and get it to you on time versus being 100% accurate and being months behind, which I think, especially in the restaurant world, is a really common problem that we see is those P&Ls are 2 months behind, 3 months behind, and then I used to always call it an autopsy report versus a diagnostic report. It's that time has passed and gone from there. What do you think the role of finance has changed, especially in multi-unit businesses over the years? How do you think that role has changed?
Well, kind of going back to what I said,
Yep.
initially, everyone was counting on, let's reconcile the bank accounts. Let's make sure that all the money that we said we were going to get, we got. And by the way, I'm not trying to trivialize that because that's critically, important.
Yeah.
Did we make money? Did we control our expenses? Are we within, budget? All of that is still, critical. But to me, if finance just operates in a role of, validating and reporting data, then all we are is informational, right? I want finance, to be influential, influential to the extent that if you have an idea, come to finance and finance can help you vet it out. We can look at the historical data. We can help you make better decisions, whether those decisions revolve around, discounting programs. We see particularly in the quick serve restaurant space.
Yeah.
When I started in my career, we didn't have loyalty apps. We certainly didn't have third party, delivery. There might have been, like an insert into a local newspaper or
Yeah.
some kind of local community thing, and they'd have a coupon and they would go and they'd get $1 off. And I can remember, the what I viewed as older people at that point in time, and everything becomes relevant or relative, right? Complaining, why are we giving these people $1 for this, or why are we giving them a buy one get one? And they would
Yeah.
actually really not like. They just wanted to sell at full price. Well, the realities have changed,
Yeah.
today. What drives consumer behavior, and that's where, to me, if the processing of financial information can
Yeah.
be done more accurately, coming back to what we talked about. Do we want 95%? Of course we don't want 95%. Of course we want, 100%. But if
Yeah.
we can get the majority of the data in, so whether you take, for instance, something such as, a tool like Factura, what has that done for our back office? It's allowed us to take our resources, instead of having a human being sitting behind a computer keying in an invoice and then someone else doing the quality control to make sure that it's correct, and then you process the
Yeah.
invoice. We can get invoices in a much more efficient manner, so that person that was keying now can have a higher level position where they are now trained to review, and that
Yeah.
review person now has an opportunity to learn additional skills. But more importantly, we now have more timely information. So instead of a client sending us a package or emailing a package or however information comes, the information is there immediately. So they
Yeah.
can see the invoices in the accounting system. We are striving towards that real time reporting for our clients so that they again have what? Actionable information, but more importantly, when you have actionable information, it helps you make more timely decisions as you're going forward. So it's an
Yeah.
exciting time, in my opinion, to
Yeah.
to be in finance, or in the world as general. We're looking at tools at our firm. Hey, if you would have told me that we were going to be using this solution called Claude a year ago, I would have said, "Who's Claude?" Did he the resume? And the things that we have learned,
Yeah.
how to do. The bottom line is those, and I heard this, so I'm not making this up. But at the end of the day, those that don't adapt to AI, they are going to lose their jobs, and they're
Yeah.
going to lose their job to the person that has adopted, to utilizing AI, because
Yeah.
that person is going to be more valuable, whether it's to the company they work for and or the clients that they service, because they're going to be able to give better, more actionable,
Yeah.
information. So again, to me, I love this. I wish I was 20 years younger for many, many reasons. But at the same time, this is really driving me to just embrace, what's sitting in front of us. It's really, really cool.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that exactly that. Like, there's so much at your fingertips now that it's almost sometimes overwhelming for some people that, let's be honest, I was in the restaurant industry. I still remember the credit card machines that you slid over. Like, I still remember that life back when a POS system was still really new and would crash every once in a while. So you'd have to do the old school credit card machines. I know that's no longer very, very compliant or anything like that, but, it's crazy to think how much time has changed. One thing that you made a mention of with kind of operational and finance and decision making and the influence side, when people are slow to decision making, how much of it do you think come back to bad, or do you think it's inconsistent data? What do you think is the reason that people are so slow on decision making? And then what do you think that impact is for their business?
So what take the impact to the business is they're running their business on hopes, wishes, and dreams, right? You really you just don't know, right?
Yeah.
How you're doing. Like an easy story is I had a client. Um, they ended up selling the business, but I remember sitting in their office, and the wife was complaining, "We have no money. We have no money. We have no money." And by the way, it could have been a husband complaining too, but that's just the way this was.
Yeah.
And I spent more time, by the way, with the wife in the back office component, always complaining they have no money. So what did the husband say? "I'm tired of hearing that we have no money. I'm taking this over."
Yeah.
3 months go by, right? And I go back, for my quarter, and we're sitting there, and he said, "We have no money issues. We have a lot of money in the bank." Well, guess what? When I did my quarterly, this was a smaller business. When I did my quarterly, of course they had a lot of money. But what he didn't tell the wife was that he wasn't paying any of their bills. Their AP was off the charts. So nothing really, really changed. But for the business owner that just looks at their bank account, right? It's like,
Yeah.
well, my bank account has more money. I must be making more money. So we can't look at things with blinders on. We can't look at things with, silos. So
Yeah.
when we look at things as accountants, I always teach, my people and my, clients at the end of the day, we can have a business that has a very healthy balance sheet, struggling, financially, that will survive because we just got to figure out how to get the profit up, how do we reverse some of the negative, trends.
Yeah.
Likewise, we can have a business that's over leveraged with debt. It has great profitability, great potential, but they can't generate enough cash, and they're going to be out of business too.
Yeah.
So when people have poor records, poor information, they either one don't make the right decisions, don't make any, decisions.
Yeah.
So timely, accurate. I know I keep saying that, like a broken record, but
No,
if
yeah.
you have good information, you can make good decisions. Take, for example, like labor planning and some of that tools that are out there today where it can help you predict what kind of labor hours,
Yeah.
you need to schedule. Well, that is a great help, for the business owner, particularly in states that have fair work week legislation, like take
Yep.
New York, where you have to schedule people 2 weeks in advance. Well,
Yep.
we don't know what the weather's going to be tomorrow, and the weatherman certainly don't know what the weather is going to be,
Yeah.
tomorrow. But at least if we have some methodology that can
Yep.
tell us last year, this time, or based upon sales trends, you're going to need to schedule a certain amount of hours. So instead of just robotically just giving everybody hours, you need 100 hours scheduled, for
Yep.
that shift, or you need 200 hours. It's just utilizing the tools are going to help you to be able to be, more profitable.
I love that. I think it goes back to a lot of the AI, a lot of the smart at your fingertips. Like, operators now have to learn how to make faster, smarter, better decisions, and they've got to figure it out. If you guys come in, you guys work with huge locations, and then, like you said, you work with smaller businesses. If a company wants faster, better decisions, where should they start? Like, where do you think is the best place to start to get the best bang for their buck?
Speak to
Doesn't have
their accountant, right?
Yeah.
A plug for us. I look at my clients, and we've been blessed. We have single unit restaurateurs. We have restaurateurs that own over 50 units. We go from, gross revenue, of a couple of $1 million. Our
Yeah,
largest client has 250 million of revenue, in the restaurant
yeah,
space. And the one thing that I can tell you is with 100% certainty is that if you ever meet an individual that has never made a mistake, you've met an individual that's never made a decision, right? Decision makers make mistakes.
yep,
Also, decision makers, when they make a mistake, they recognize the mistake quickly and then they pivot. So when I'm looking at, businesses that succeed, they make their decisions, they follow through, and then they measure, right? You set a target. So if my goal is that by this discounting, I'm going to increase my transaction counts, or I'm going to increase my top line sales by X, well, I
yep,
set my target. I just don't willy nilly just say I'm going to do this with no expectation, right? What is the expectation? What are you driving at? And then the only way you can measure that is to have good, financial data. The great thing about the way that, these tools are available is technology. Some people will view it as a cost, and as I said in the beginning, I view it as the tool. You can't have a contractor build your house that is not going to show up with a hammer and a saw and all kinds of pneumatic, type tools. They're not going to build your house with their bare hands.
Bare
And those
hands.
that are going to use, like I think about a roofer, an old style roofer, they have all the manual labor. You still got to get that up there, but they would take everything off and they would put one shingle down and a guy would, bang the hammer, or a gal, would
Yep.
bang the hammer. Now everything is these pneumatic nailers. So they can do a roof much quicker, right? Probably do it better because there's less stress,
Yep.
on the individual. So to me, it's the same thing, in the restaurant space. Let's take the things that we can make easy, because running a restaurant is incredibly hard. Everybody thinks if they know how to boil water, right, or they know how to turn on, a flame, they can make the best hamburger possible. They can make the best pasta or make the best drinks. Running a restaurant business is incredibly hard. And if we can help them make really great decisions on what we call a penny business,
Yeah.
we can really help them be extremely successful.
I love that. All right. One last hot take. Where do you personally draw the line between finance should control this and operations should own this? And where do you think most companies get that line wrong?
Most companies get the line wrong where they think that they have competing interests there, where there's a lack of respect between operations and finance.
Yep.
Well, I sit on the financial side. If you know anyone that knows me, they know that I have the thought process of an operations
Yep.
partner with them. I go through their kitchens. I know what their equipment costs. I know their schedules for cleaning their vats, for cleaning their ductwork. We dig in because, as I explain to my people, the best way to be an advisor to a client is to understand their business. So
Yep.
when you have an ops team that just views the accounting team as, well, the tattletale, team. Well, they said we didn't make the money. I don't believe, their numbers. Their numbers aren't, accurate.
Yep.
Or the financial team saying the operations team, they're not doing, their job. When you can get that collaboration, get the ops team to understand, we want you to report raw waste. And the reason we want you to report raw waste is so that as we measure where food cost is or where base food cost is, where are our problems? Are we throwing away spoiled food? Maybe we need to change, how we order. Do we have a theft issue? Right? Theft is a big problem, in the restaurants. I mean,
Yep.
at Tibet, I remember I was given a seminar, and one of the things I asked an audience, and I said, "How many people have garbage in the restaurant?" And only a few hands go up. I go, "Only a few of you? None of you throw out, peels for potatoes or lemons
Yeah.
or anything like that? There's no trimming, waste." Every hand goes up. I said, "Okay, how many of you people, choose the color of your garbage bags?" And everyone looks at me with the quizzical, look. I said, "Have any of you ever thought about using clear garbage bags?" And I can see some people were getting where I was going. I said, "One of the biggest areas where people steal from you is you get the green hefty garbage bag, and they put good product in the garbage bag, right? They take it outside, they put it by the dumpster, and then they tell their friend, yet they put steaks and potatoes and beer and all this right by the dumpster. But if it's a clear garbage bag, everybody can see what's going out the door." So it's those little types of things,
Yeah.
right? Can take this penny business and keep the pennies on the good side of the ledger, rather than going, "I don't understand why my food cost is so much
So
higher
high.
than I expect it, to be."
Oh, that's so funny. Well, fantastic. Last thing is you kind of said this before, bringing it full circle, but do you agree that most finance teams right now are spending too much time explaining the past and not enough time influencing the present? And you kind of said right now that obviously your team's not doing that and you see the shift, but what is the biggest shift that you would suggest to a team if they feel like they're doing that, if they feel like they're spending so much time in the past and not focusing on the present?
See, a lot of that is driven by, the owner, of
Yeah.
the business. And if the owner, just views the the back office, the finance component as truly a burden or an administrative, you know, function, they're never going to understand the importance of making the investment to make that to become a more progressive unit to provide more actionable information. So I think if anyone, listening to this, or those that are on the ops team, if everyone can kind of come to that kumbaya moment that realizes that all of us working collaboratively towards, a common goal. So when you have a leader, that understands that to drive the business forward today, we need good, great, accurate financial
Yep.
reporting, cooperation from the ops team. I mean, even think about, like, we talk about maintenance.
Yeah.
Maintenance is part of operations. Well, what happens when companies neglect maintenance because they want to try to save a couple of bucks? It eventually comes back to them in terms of equipment either failing or
Yep.
wearing out, right? When it fails. So if you have a shake machine, for instance, well, you forget the cost of having, to fix it. What about the lost profitability when you didn't have the shake, that
Yeah.
you can sell? And what about the customer that doesn't come back because
Yep.
they say that restaurant, the shake machine never works, or
Yep.
that restaurant, they're always running out of product. They're trying to be too skinny with inventory, controls. So,
Yeah.
so much of this needs to come together from a collective basis to provide support so the people that make decisions can make them, quite frankly, faster.
I love that. All right, rapid fire on the fun questions now. This is where we get to have fun. Favorite restaurant you'll always go back to?
Anyone owned by any of my clients.
Oh, good answer. Most underrated role in a restaurant?
Hmm, maintenance team.
I like that. Absolutely, because I've had to scrub hoods and that is exhausting. Absolutely. One thing finance teams pretend is fine, but absolutely isn't.
They have enough cash in the bank,
Nice.
enough working capital. Most businesses
Nice.
are undercapitalized. That causes sometimes bad decisions.
Yep. If you walked into a messy finance function tomorrow, what is the first thing you'd fix?
The first thing I would do is not change anything. The first thing I
Nice.
would do is I would interview everybody in the organization to understand their role and understand how things flow. And as soon as I understood how things flow, then I would work on processes to make sure that the information flowed uh, efficiently. But everyone jumps in with change. I have the greatest idea, or I have the greatest software solution. You don't even know how things are done.
Yep.
So at the end of this day, it's really taking the time to understand, the business and how information flows.
Um, Last, one word your team would use to describe you.
Hmm. I can think of a lot of words, maybe some of them not so good sometimes. Uh, but if there was one word, driven.
I like that. I like that. It's a good word. Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. For all those listening, if you're in the area and want to learn more about Andy and his team, I'll attach the link below. If you're curious about any of the tech that we mentioned, including Factura, I'll include that link as well. But more importantly, is join us next time so we can listen some more in the future about all that we have to offer and all the great tips and tricks we get from the industry. Andy, thank you again so much. We really appreciated it, and thank you for taking the time.
I appreciate it, Megan. Thank you very much for having me be invited. You have an awesome day.